All right, I think we've got a critical mass, and I think more people will be signing in as we get started, but I'd like to get our program going. So first and foremost, welcome to everybody. My name is Chet Kerr. I am the one of the heads of the Rivertown Pollinator Pathway Project, and I welcome everybody here tonight to our next Living Classroom series here in the Rivertowns. The Pollinator Pathway Project mission is to engage and educate the community about pollinators and native plants and reducing pesticides, and promoting public awareness about the crucial role that pollinators play, and raising awareness about and preserving and protecting open space in parks, which is a broad mission, and it's kind of continues to grow across our region. Before we start tonight's program, I want to mention one item. I want to remind everybody that on June 13th, which is coming up quickly, Healthy Yards Westchester is again sponsoring the Westchester Pollinator Garden Tour, which we hope will feature several, which I know will feature several of the pollinator-friendly gardens here in the Rivertowns as well throughout Westchester. The demonstration gardens at the O'Hara Nature Center here in Irvington are on the tour and well worth the visit. Tonight, we're very lucky to be hearing from Sefra Alexandra. Let's get some more people in. Who is leading the Connecticut's Northeast Organic Farming Association's Ecotype Project. The Ecotype Project is working with farms to build and expand the amount of available local native pollinator seed in our region. This effort aims to supply nurseries, homeowners, and farmers with the plants they need to help restore our native habitat, support our local pollinators, and ensure local food security throughout Ecoregion 59. Sefra holds a Master's of Arts in Teaching in the field of agroecology. She's also a wilderness skills instructor. Last fall, Sefra led the inaugural botanical expedition, which was an 87-mile canoe journey down the Connecticut River riparian basin, planting over 500 native plants in Ecotype pollinator gardens. She's also a Wings World Quest flag carrier, which she can tell you what that is, and a member of the Explorers Club. So everybody, please welcome Sefra. Sefra, I turn it over to you.
Thank you so much, Chet. I'm so excited to be here, and thank you for inviting me to speak to the wonderful Rivertowns Pollinator Pathway. I have to say, it's the Pollinator Pathway movement that really made the work that I'm doing possible, because it's made the conversation around the importance of native plants in our landscape, rewilding our landscape, the importance of our pollinators, such a prevalent conversation amongst so many towns throughout Connecticut, New York, and the Northeast now. So it's a pleasure to be here. I am going to basically take you all on a bit of a seed conservation safari here. So what we're going to do, and it's going to be a lot of information really quickly, but hopefully this can be kind of that arc of painting what this world of seed conservation looks like from the international, the national, and the local level. And we'll talk about what ecotypes are and how you can actually work with them. But what I first wanted to do is just introduce myself. I call myself the seed huntress. Say botany needed a little bit of marketing, and I've been working in different seed conservation efforts around the globe for the past decade. I believe that seeds are this amazing, these living embryos that have all of the genetics of stewardship from all of those, both, insect and animal and human that have come before us, for all those that come after us. So being able to work in this field is really quite an honor and a privilege. And I acknowledge all of those that have been doing this work before me. What I want to do is tell you how diversity is preserved globally. I can't ask you to raise your hands, Zoom apocalypse, but perhaps some of you have heard of the Svalbard Global Seed Vault. Now, it is a seed vault that works as a black box system up in Longyearbyen, Norway, and it's where a backup of all of our world's field crop seeds are stored. Only the countries that put the seeds there can take them back out. Syria, in 2011, when they were experiencing civil unrest, their seed bank was bombed. If a backup of all of those heritage wheats that have grown in those climates and bioregionally adapted for thousands of years weren't safeguarded at Svalbard, they would have been lost forever. So in that instance, They were able to take those seeds back out, regrow them in Morocco and Lebanon, and then send us and safeguard accessions is the science word for seeds, back up in Norway. So this is an amazing resource when we're talking about field crops, but there's also something called crop wild relatives. And when we talk about crop wild relatives, we just want to look at our world map as where native plants and where especially food plants that we eat. Sorry if you can hear the beeping. I don't know how to turn that off. Basically where native food crops and plants have first emerged on our earth, where they emerge. If we think about maize and wheat in Mexico, or potatoes in Peru, or pulses and grain in India, and so forth, you can see that these great centers of diversity are based on where these crops first emerged in the globe. A wonderful gentleman named Nikolai Vavilov in the early 1900s in Russia, he was the first botanical explorer who was going around and saying, you know, I think it's really important that we start safeguarding these seeds and these genetics, because as he saw climate changing and man-made and human disasters, he said, if we don't have these as kind of our painter's palette to rebreed what we need, if there's no one safeguarding these, then our food security, our cultural identity, all of what our wild lands look like can all be lost. So Nikolai Vavilov was the first one to actually start creating a seed bank. The short version of that story is after a siege at Leningrad, the people safeguarding his bank basically stayed inside to protect the seeds. Instead of eating the seeds, died of starvation. He was imprisoned, also died of starvation. So the father of who mapped out where our centers of origin, it's actually a sad tale, but it shows the dedication that they had to preserving the biodiversity of our earth. So the Crop Trust is the organization that oversees the standards for this gene bank platform. So what these circles represent is where our largest seed banks are around the world. Again, where all of the diversity, 150,000 varieties of maize and wheat are safeguarded in Mexico. Again, the potatoes in Peru, and where I was chosen as one of 7 fellows for the Crop Trust, I went to Fiji to study a crop called taro, Colocasia esculenta. As a Gene Bank Impacts Fellow, I was charged with telling the story, why is preserving diversity so important? With taro, as an ethnobotanist, it's a cultural totem. So that means it's given in rituals of birth, life, death, marriage. It's their staple food crop, their main export. It's intrinsically tied to the fabric of who they are. In 1993, a blight came in, and it turns out because they're vegetatively propagated, all of the taro within 6 weeks was wiped out, and it took those ethnobotanical explorers, like what Vavilov was doing, they had to go back out to those centers of origin, regather the diversity of taro that had natural blight resistance. And then after 10 years, they were able to rebreed a palatable and blight resistant line. The reason why I'm telling you all of this is because food security is often an issue in many places around the globe. And what we're doing to protect our native plants and protect our pollinators is what's pollinating and protecting our local food security. So in another instance of that, my twin brother and I run a company called Tactivate, where we do disaster response, and I do it from the food security side. So this is the Southern Department of Haiti that experiences man-made and human, civil unrest and natural disasters quite frequently. This is what an empty community seed bank looks like. These folks don't have a seed bank to go to. They don't have backup seed. The backup seed they have is what they eat. And so when your fields get wiped out, you're planting your backup seed. And so oftentimes, aid organizations come down with rice, which undercuts the growers that still have rice, introduce seed that's not viable, and make it so that they can't really facilitate their own resiliency. So this is an example of where, by listening to their needs, we fortified a community seed bank with this gentleman, the Iliesant Magloire, and he oversees 25 main farm managers who oversee thousands of smaller hold farm managers. So when they have a seed bank with their regionally adapted seed that's already been adapted to their climate and their pests and their soils, they're able to replant their fields immediately, which is so important in subsistence farming nations that rely on what they're growing for their livelihood and for their nutrition and sustenance. So far we've looked at international seed banks and community seed banks. Now, what about our wild seeds? What about the seeds that exist on our wild landscapes? Well, the Millennium Seed Bank at the Royal Botanical Gardens of Kew said, great, the Crop Trust is safeguarding the field crops, we're going to safeguard the wild species. And no one was really doing that in the United States. So there's a program called the Seeds of Success that goes out onto the wild lands with kind of like a detective list of the seeds that you're hunting for. And you go out and make sure you're finding populations that are large enough, hiking 10 miles into the wilderness where there's the greatest rattlesnake territories for Draba hitchcockii, these beautifully rare plants, but doing it in a sustainable way to make sure that our wild plants are safeguarded. I had the privilege of doing this in Idaho and learned so much. My dad sent me snake gators when he realized what I was doing. But now we've come back locally, and I think, so now we realize how the wild plants are safeguarded. So after all of these international and national adventures, I came back to Connecticut. And I've done some heirloom revivals of onions and things, but I was seeing the degradation of our wild landscapes and saying, what can be done to safeguard our local bioregionally, or as this map shows, eco-regionally adapted native plants. So ecoregions, the map that you're looking at, is a framework which was created by James Obernick, a brilliant mind at the EPA. And he said, you know what, there's the hydrologists who work off one map and the ornithologists that work off another and the forestry folks and all of these disparate fields of science that all work towards the same goal of conservation. We're working off of slightly different frameworks. And when we put our bug eyes on, right, they don't see where Connecticut ends or where Massachusetts begins or where New York begins. They see the riparian corridors, they see the coastal areas, they see the broadleaf forests. And so what this map does in a broad stroke, artistic mosaic way, puts together the habitats and communities where it says, okay, if we collect seeds in Ecoregion 59, which Westchester is part of, we can be sure that if we plant those seeds anywhere within Ecoregion 59, we're putting the right plants in the right place. Because often when we buy our native plants in the native plant trade, we're actually buying seeds that were grown somewhere in the Midwest, which may be adapted to have slightly different bloom times or be adapted to a different climate, which makes a huge difference for insects like the monarch, which have a 5-year migration. And if they're staying too long while the wrong plant, the wrong type of milkweed is blooming up here, they're going to miss like the domino effect as the bloom times happen all the way down their migratory path. So again, ecotypic just refers to, like I did those wild collections for the Seeds of Success, wild collective, truly local native plants, the plants of that place, okay? And so what we're trying to do with this project is imbue our living seed bank. So the fancy Latin word for in the soil, in the living seed bank, which of course, as conservationists is our optimal goal, because then it can stay vigorous and adapting again to those climate and those pests and everything that's going on around them. That's called in situ. When we have to rely on Svalbard, the global seed vault, where it's off in the cold storage, that's ex situ. And it is necessary in case we come to these, tragic instances where our seeds could be lost. So what we're trying to do with the Ecotype project is amplify the amount of ecotypic seed that exists in the Northeast. There's other parts of the country that have really robust native seed supply chains. In the Midwest, out in Oregon and other places. Here in the Northeast, we don't have that. We have many industries that are looking for this truly local native seed, but it doesn't exist at scale. So that's what we're trying to address. Just a bit on semantics before we go further down the line. Oftentimes people talk about cultivars or nativars. What is that? Well, that is when you select a native plant in the horticultural trade for, you like its height, you like its flower color, you like its showiness. When you're doing that, oftentimes the nursery trade is doing what was happening with the taro. they're just vegetatively propagating it, taking cuttings, because it's a lot easier and quicker than from growing from seed. What does that do? Well, in essence, it's creating that same monoculture like we saw with the taro in Fiji, and can make it really susceptible to being wiped out by something. So what we want to do when we're saving and safeguarding this wild ecotypic seed is making sure that we're maintaining all of those arcs of diversity that exist in the wild genetics. Because there's folks who talk about bringing seeds up from warmer climates as the climate shifts. But what I've heard from a lot of really brilliant botanists is if you just allow those genetics that are embedded in those wild seeds, they're going to figure it out on their own. I had a great mentor who took his iPhone in one hand and a seed in the other, and he said, which has more intelligence? He said, the seed. It's been here for so much longer. It knows how to adapt. So have faith in the seeds. So again, what we're trying to do with this movement is have people want to know and ask about the provenance of that seed. Like in art, we see the Mona Lisa, Da Vinci, where did it come from? What year? We want to start tracking that sense of place. Where did this seed originate and where is it being planted? And so the pollinator pathway has really paved that way for wanting natives in the landscape. But now we're elevating that conversation to say, okay, and where are the natives that you're putting in your landscape coming from? We don't want perfect to be the enemy of good. If you have pollinators in your landscape that you bought that isn't ecotypic, that's great. Don't worry. We're just saying now, when possible, look for ecotypic seed that's best adapted for your ecoregions. So again, I think this is even an old slide, because I think there's something like 250 towns now on the pollinator pathway. It's just remarkable work. Luis Washer, they've been such great allies in all of this. But what we're really trying to do with those living seed banks is reduce the fragmentation that's happened, right? Because if we don't have these wild ecological corridors for our birds and our pollinators to travel through, then we're really degrading our landscapes, and that can lead to a lot of big problems. So we all have a role to play. The excitement about this project is it brings the botanists and the farmers and the homeowners and everyone together to say, we're not just homeowners, we're land stewards, and we need to start being really intelligent about how we're caretaking the land around us, because it affects, like in concentric rings, so much of those wildlands that border. I have a video that explains the Ecotype project. For the sake of time, I might skip over it now, but it is on our website, the CT NOFA /Ecotype project. And maybe at the end we have some more time, I can play it. But let's see. So what this study is showing, so this comes out of the Mid-Atlantic Regional Seed Bank, which is run by Ed Toth. He and Sarah Tangren did this amazing survey of native plant materials use and commercial availability in the Eastern United States. And what they found is there's all these different industries. You can see that bar graph: restoration, pollinator support, wildlife habitat, stewardship, mitigation, horticultural landscapes. All of these different industries, they all want ecotypic seed. They prefer it. The problem is it's only readily available 15% of the time. And after that, they're going 400 miles away for their next closest source of seed, and then 800 miles away. So just how we had to really reframe our food sheds, now we're reframing our seed sheds, right? We want our food to be local. We want our native plants to be local. So yeah, this study just came out, and I have a link at the end of the slideshow for that. So again, I am doing this project under the auspices of CT NOFA, which is the Northeast Organic Farming Association. And why would Connecticut NOFA, be caring about pollinator species? Well, if you see on the left, you have blueberries that weren't really successfully pollinated. And then the blueberries on the right were. So if we think about it, really, the pollinators are what are paying farmers wages. So if we want to ensure that we have high yielding crops, we need to make sure that we're providing them with the habitat and the food that they need. So under a USDA specialty crop block grant, where our specialty crop is the native seed, we've been putting these native pollinator plants on the farm, and I'll show you how. Again, this is just this beautiful old poster that shows both beneficial and pest insects that go on our field crops. The best way to mitigate this problem on your farm is the amount of diversity you have. Diversity equals resilience, both in the crops that you're planting and the native plants that you're planting, because the lacewings come and the aphids come, and then they can, there's a balancing act. Nature understands that homeostasis, and as much as we can mimic that in our landscapes, the better off we are. So again, having native plants on your land provides so much ecosystem services in terms of the beneficial insects that come. They're also oftentimes great for herbal medicine, if that's your type of thing. Of course, they bring the pollinators, and they are able to deter some of these natural enemies. So how is the Ecotype Project actually amplifying the amount of this truly local native seed? Well, this graphic here shows you what our supply chain process looks like. So we work with botanists. So we want to make sure when we're talking about wild collecting native seed, we are not encouraging everyone to go out into the wild lands and harvest seed. In fact, that would be not a beneficial thing to do. What we're doing is relying on people that have permission to harvest from the landscapes they're on. They've been trained to understand what a sustainable collection looks like, knowing population sizes and how much of that population you can sustainably collect without damaging that, because that is still food in the wild and habitat for many species. So we make sure our botanists, know the species we want to collect and do that work. Then we find organic farmers, and we take 200 plugs of a certain species, so that's called a founder plot. And we plant it out just like you would a row of tomatoes. And then after those founder plots go to seed, because seeds are fruits, so they also have their perfect window of maturity, which I'll show you in a later slide. Myself and others go in and collect the seed, dry it, clean it, get it to the nursery growers, who grow that out and make it available to the end users of having truly local, native, ecotypic Ecoregion 59 seed. Yay. So that's the goal. And so here we have Jordy Elkins, a wonderful botanist, and this is Spartina. So we're working on now trying to have more of the coastal restoration native species come into the pipeline. This is really cool, because to stratify this seed, you actually have to pickle it, right? Because you're always mimicking where it would be in natural ecosystems. So this would be in the salt marshes. So these are the species that we're working with so far. And, the limitations of how many species we're working with is really predicated upon our funding. So there is an inherent cost to bring these species into the pipeline, and we're trying to make sure that we have species that cover different bloom times throughout the season. And then as we move on, we want to incorporate shrubs and trees, because each of those trophic layers is very important. So perhaps some of you recognize some of these species. It's been quite a pleasure to learn to work with them. Oftentimes that weed means, especially when you're giving them such idyllic conditions, they really do quite well and are rather prolific. So I really like this image from the invitation that went out for this talk. Many of the Asclepiuses, or Asclepius, depending how you pronounce it, are amazing host plants for the monarch caterpillar, and the caterpillars are so important for our birds, which are indicators of the ecological health of our entire ecosystems. And it's just really important to know that, each of the different plants that we work with are hosts to different pollinators or beneficial insects. Has to do with their proboscis, their tongue length. You can see the sweat bees and the Penstemon digitalis. And so really, the more of a variety you have, the more of the amazing diversity you'll see of these pollinators. And I have a great slide later showing that. So this is the Penstemon digitalis. Actually, our founder plot is starting to be in bloom right now. It's gorgeous. And you can kind of see the morphology as these plants go to seed, right? So we're monitoring it. Just like I said, it's a fruit. You can see the pods up top. That's when they're still kind of young, and then they get to be that brown and that hard. And you can even leave them on the stalk for a while to let that seed start to stratify naturally. Stratify just means be cold in the outdoor environment, or basically mimic the natural environment that those seeds would fall in so that it will germinate. But I have a better slide explaining that a little bit later. So now you can see this is what a founder plot looks like. So this is at the Hickory's Farm in Ridgefield, Connecticut. And you can see the beautiful Joe Pyeweed on the left and the New York Ironweed on the right. Sometimes people think that native plants aren't pretty or they look messy or something. I can tell you that these rows are just gorgeous. And, you know, we plant them like this for ease of seed harvest and maintaining it so that they don't have weeds, and that we're able to, I'll have to go through it quite a few times to make sure I'm collecting all the seed at its perfect ripeness. So we've gotten a number of really fantastic farmers to join on, and you know, hopefully we'll have more farms up in your neck of the woods up there. Bram's on the call and he's hopefully helping work on that facet of it. So it's really exciting work. And again, for each of those farms, we want to make sure that we have pollinators, plants that are blooming from very early spring all the way through midsummer. There was this great woman from the South who said, it's like, you can't invite house guests over for a week and only feed them on Monday, y'all. You know, we have to make sure that we're feeding our pollinators throughout the entire season. And again, there's that image of that forest ecology, because different pollinators and beneficials need habitat at different heights. There's a great woman, Edwina Von Gall, who just started 2/3 for the Birds. I would look up that initiative. They're doing so much to help make a robust conversation around native plants in your backyard and for the birds. And the Wild Seed Project, where this image comes from, she has a beautiful publication with such amazing art and really great resources. They have their Rewilding Pledge, where you get a whole bunch of really great topics that you can implement on the home scale, because founder plots can only be put on farms, and that's what we're supporting now. But as I'll show you, our seeds, hopefully in the future, will be able to be distributed on the homeowner level. So again, here is this amazing entomological safari in your backyard. Our head farmers at the Hickories, Jean Linville and Abby Cartson, they were looking at the black-eyed Susan. They were saying, where are these pollinators? We're never seeing them. So one night they went out and they put their red headlamp on. Lo and behold, it's night pollinators. So not only do we need to make sure that we're acknowledging the pollinators' needs throughout the season, but it's also throughout the day, because even as flowers open up at certain points of the day, different pollinators are visiting them then. So there's so much fun, and just to learn, I've learned so much going through with this project, learning about all of the amazing diversity of insects that exists around us. So I just wanted to illustrate what it looks like when some of these seeds some of these species are going to seed. So here's again the Joe Pyeweed. You can see it in full bloom and starting to senesce. Now that picture all the way in the bottom right, that's gone too far. You wouldn't want to collect that seed. That almost is like moldy. But that third picture there, you can see it when it gets really fluffy. You want to collect it right at that point where it's just about to blow away on the wind. There's many brilliant dispersal mechanisms of seeds that, as a lover of words, I love to study. So the dispersal of seed by wind is anemochory. And that is why our dandelion seeds have that fluffy pappus. And you can understand that they're trying to get away from the mother plant. And I can't tell you, I mean, our 200 Joe Pyeweed plants, we're literally collecting millions of seed. So the ROI of seed is quite encouraging. In terms of the doom and gloom of climate weirding or whatever your feelings are, I say it's too late to be pessimistic, and planting one seed yields hundreds of thousands when it comes to these. So I think it's really quite encouraging and hopeful work. And once these seeds are back on the landscape, nature really does its thing to proliferate them in a number of different ways. Murmockery, dispersal by ants, very cool. So now, just a note on our founder plots, we leave these stems up. Now, these are one of the mints, but I'll go through and lightly cut off those seed heads just to make sure I cut out the seeds, but I'm leaving that whole stalk because so many pollinators actually overwinter in those stalks. And even until now, they still need it for a variety of different reasons. So just a few weeks ago in our founder plots, we cut down the stalks a little bit. So when we're harvesting this year, we're not poking our eyes into it, but we really are leaving those stalks as much as possible because that's really important habitat for them. So that's a little bit, there's a lot of different paradigm shifts that have to go on when learning how to work with these native perennials. So in that vein, we want to get as many people as possible working with these species. So this cool little black box there, that's our getting started protocol toolkit that we give to farmers that come on board. But don't worry, for all of you out there on our website, we have all of the cards that are in that getting started toolkit for free. So you see the website on the bottom, ctnofa.org/ecotype project. At the bottom of that page, you'll see free downloadable PDFs that say how you can, your general growing guidelines, what to think about because these are multi-year crops, your seed saving guidelines. There's also logs that you can keep notes about what you're learning and seeing. We're hoping to create a real community of practice around this to share best practices and what we've all learned to build out how we can, really make this a robust movement for everyone. So we have it by species that we've worked with. You can see this is what a New York ironweed card looks like. So it tells you where you should plant it, what it's tolerant to, who its ecological allies are. And then this, you can again see the beautiful Vernonia or the New York ironweed going to seed. It really is so fun seeing what all these different seeds look like. And the back of it, but sometimes you're like, is that the seed? Is that the seed? Is that the chaff? I don't know. So these cards are really helpful for helping there's those little grid lines so they can help you give an idea of how big they are and also what you're looking for. On our scale, we're cleaning them to remove that pappus. On the home scale, you can totally just leave it, not even worry about it. You just want to make sure that you dry your seed out enough. So this is what those grower field notes and the seed collection notes look like. So all of these you can just print out and have them for your use at home. Let's see, did that advance? Oh. So once you have collected your seed, the journey's not over. After you collect it, then we clean it, store it, stratify it, and germinate it. Again, you can see that ironweed, and you can see basically that's like a car mat from an auto store that after it's dry enough, I would rub the seed on to remove the pappus. You have to make sure your seed's really dry, else you're just going to crack open the actual embryo. So there's inexpensive ways to do this. Any dollar store, just get every size sieve you can find and you can figure out which one will work best. But this is what collection looks like. You can see where that hand is on the left-hand side. Those flowers, they're not fully in seed bloom, but on the right hand, you can see that it's really dry and they're really fluffy. So that I'll just shake off into my brown paper bag. I'm not filling my brown paper bag too much because I want it to be able to dry out without getting moldy or be too packed in. You're just drying them in a dark, dry place that rodents can't get to. You don't want the sun really hitting it, but yeah, birds and rodents, you want to maybe hang them on some sort of a beam. Cleaning it's kind of a mess. You can see you're rubbing it, you're sifting it, you're trying to figure out what the seed is. So with our grant, that machine on the right is called the Winnow Wizard, which was invented by this brilliant guy who works on Frank Morton, a brilliant seed breeder for lettuce's farm. And he was sick of using those old clipper machines and all these old machines. So he invented this where you can see that hopper where you drop your seeds down and you modulate the wind speed. So then it blows the chaff away from the seed that will drop down clean into those buckets. So we're just starting to work with this and we're hoping to make it available to all of the farmers that are growing the seed so that we can have a seed collective eventually to be able to offer you all this ecotypic seed. So here it is. These jars represent so much work and so much collaboration from the botanists, the farmers, the seed collectors to, it's really quite amazing. And you can see like the Penstemon digitalis, that's that huge jar in the back. Holy moly, it's a lot of seed. But when we did our germination tests, the germination rate is really low on Penstemon. So that's why those plants give off so much seed. So there's also a lot to learn in what the quantity in a packet that we would give out would be, because we want to make sure we can ensure certain amounts of germination. So wild plants have a total mind of their own. General rule of thumb with seed storage is you want to keep it cool, dark, and dry. And when it goes to the next season, well, again, as I said, stratification, if we can think about those wild pollinator seeds, what happens? Well, the seeds blow in the wind, they fall to the soil, then they get rained on, muddy, snow, cold, freeze, thaw, swell, sun. You can imagine, right? But these have been adapted to go through those cycles to be able to grow and germinate. So if we're removing them from the wild, we have to mimic that. And that's what we call a cold moist stratification, where you're wrapping them like a germ test in moist, not soaking wet paper towels, and you're putting them in the fridge, you're labeling it. And depending on species, we have it listed on those cards. You'll put it in the fridge for 30 days or 60 days or 90 days. If you're just broadcasting it in a meadow, you can use the medium of sand, again, moist, not soaking wet. And an even easier way is, let's see, is called winter sowing. So my computer is being a bit slow. So what winter sowing is, okay, there we go. So again, this is from the Wild Seed Project, Heather McCargo up in Maine. So what winter sowing is it's saying right after you collect that seed, put it back out in a pot on your landscape, put a little bit of netting or caging or something over it so that rodents can't get to it, just cover it lightly and let nature do its thing. Just leave it out there. It'll snow, rain, whatever the weather's going to do. And then in the spring, when they're ready, they'll just start naturally germinating on their own. And what we found for the farmers that we're working with, they've had a lot better success with germination using this method than putting it in the fridge. Because again, even within one species, there might be huge variation for how long until they'll germinate. So going forward, we're just building these like high walled sandboxes that have, ground cloth. We're putting trays in, we're putting the seeds out, and then covering it with a light removable ground cloth on top to keep the rodents out, and just letting them winter sow. The only thing about that is if you were to do that method in a greenhouse, is just making sure that you keep the soil moist and don't let it dry out. So all of that is just a way to make sure that the end users for the pollinator pathways and the garden clubs and the land trusts and the Department of Transportation, which in Connecticut is under a Pollinator Act that says, if and when truly local native seed is available, you have to use it, but it hasn't been available at scale. Well, hopefully with this initiative and these efforts, it will be for all of those ecological restoration projects that we had mentioned. So we've been doing a number of, or we don't do them, but we help support and advertise different groups that do plant sales that work with our nursery growers to make these available on the homeowner scale, because our nursery growers have been predominantly for people within the trade, but now we're trying to make these plants through Gilberti's in Westport and through a couple other nurseries more available through plant sales to you all. And so what our hope is with this Ecotype Project logo is that when you see it, then you understand that the provenance of place has been considered, that they've been sustainably wild collected, organically grown, and grown with nursery growers who use OMRI certified up potting mix and so forth. So it's just really trying to create a standards of understanding for these native local plants. So as mentioned, in an effort to help spread the joy and the fun of this work, I led the botanical expedition, where I said, I'm not a botanist, I'm a botanist, and took 9 of my fellow citizen scientist friends on 5 canoes. We took 500 native plants and started at the John Ledyard Canoe Club in Dartmouth. That's a really cool history on his own. He was in some of the first classes of Dartmouth, dropped out, went and hung out with the indigenous tribes right over the Canadian border, made a dugout canoe, went down to his uncle's in Hartford, hopped on a steamship, and ended up going on James Cook's expedition and dying in the taiga of Siberia. So I wanted to honor his great botanical legacy, and we started there. And it wasn't until after the portage at Bellows Falls that we were actually in Ecoregion 59. So after carrying our canoes for a mile portage with 500 plants, my friends were not the happiest with me at that exact point. We were in Ecoregion 59 and in a wilderness campsite and on a farm along the river, a farm that had actually rematriated that land to honor the indigenous folks who had stewarded it for so long, let us plant these ecotypic species back where they were from. And it was really beautiful. You know, I am born and raised in Connecticut, which is an Algonquin word that refers to the Long Tidal River. And I come from an area that was the unceded lands of the Pagasic Golden Hill tribe. And that means the mouth of the river. And because of the chestnuts and the prolific mussels and oysters and the abundance of food here, they're really some of the most peaceful tribes in the nation. And this area was called Matchmucks, the beautiful land. So honoring these riparian corridors that have been the passageways for so many insects and animals and humans throughout time, to be able to re-imbue those living seed banks was so important to us. There's also, you know, hydrockery, dispersal of seed by water, and anthropockery, dispersal of seed by humans. So we all, you know, as caretakers and stewards should work with nature, not against it, and give back to these lands that we love to do these amazing journeys in. You know, to go on an expedition, you don't have to go to the Himalayas. You can go in your backyard, and there's so much ecological restoration that's needed wherever you are. So I think it's really fun to check out what wildlands are still existing where you are and help to re-imbue them. Certainly in the Hudson Valley, I was just up that way, and it's extraordinary, the beauty there. Wings World Quest is an organization that supports female scientists in the field. So I was honored to carry an expedition flag for them. And the Explorers Club is kind of the old hallowed halls of where the Shackletons and great explorers like that have carried flags for and made their great scientific treatises and speeches out throughout time. And so for me, I just want to, you know, help spread the importance of seed-based restoration. And we will be paddling. This is what the river looked like, just beautiful, beautiful to be out there with these plants. And our next expedition is September 17th to 27th, where we're going from where we ended at the top of the Massachusetts border to the Long Island Sound. So if any of you all want to come out and paddle for a weekend and join along, let me know. And really, as we get to the end of this, let's see. I think it's really important just to acknowledge from what we've seen from the work that the global seed banks do, what happens in disaster zones, what's happening across, you know, our wildlands nationally, and what's happening to our local wild places. Again, that same mentor, Bill McDormand, who said, you know, the phone and the seed, he also said, we're the people of the pinch. We're at this pinch of time, and in the history of our, you know, that genetic biodiversity, those amazing arcs of resilience of all that taste and flavor and culture that through seed, that is really being rapidly lost, right? We need to protect our heirlooms from where we are, and our native plants are our entomological heirlooms. It's what they've been safeguarding for generations. So we can either, you know, watch this erode away or step in as stewards and really play our role to make sure that we're putting these seeds back where they belong and proliferating these amazing ecological corridors. So with that, I will put these resources in the chat for you all. And I think that, let's see, that may be it. So again, this is our website, and you can see this chrysalis here. This work does work, and I hopefully, you know, the pollinators are grateful for it. And it's like that chrysalis is just, you know, the most gorgeous piece of ecological jewelry. Nature does great work. So hopefully with the time we have left, I would love to answer questions, and thank you all for listening.
Sefra, thank you so much. Very wonderful talk, very fascinating, really, really interesting stuff. I have an initial question, and everybody else should ask questions as well. But in my front yard, I grow Joe Pye weed. And how would I know whether the Joe Pye weed seed is native to our ecoregion or not? Is there a way of looking at it or evaluating it to decide whether it's come from someplace else?
There's amazing resource. Okay, so I've had to learn how to speak the language of floras, where you go through and you're looking at what the hair structure looks like and what the stamen structure. So Arthur Haynes made the flora of the Northeast. So if you wanted to do the work and identify exactly which species of Joe Pye that was, you can go through those different floras. There's also, see if there's a local botanist or someone who is really botanically well-versed. You can take a picture of that and send it to them to see if that they can identify it. In terms of the actual genetics, there are some like laboratory genetic tests that we at the Ecotype Project, that's our next step, is really trying to look at the genetics. There's a wonderful research botanist at the Native Plant Trust who hopefully we can work with to start kind of marking out what those genetics look like. But I think really, depending on how long that's been there, even if it's not ecotypic, it's probably very well adapted to your soil and your site. And I'm sure if you're seeing pollinators on it and different insects, that's doing the great work that it needs to do. So, but in terms of figuring it out, if it's been there for a very long time, it's meeting botanists or researching what the land use has been for your property, but before you were there.
Okay. Here's a question from the chat. Is it best practice as a home gardener to plant from seed, or is it that there just aren't enough plant farmers currently offering ecotypic plants in our ecoregion 59? So I guess the first question is it best practice as a home gardener to plant from seed?
I think depending on what size you're trying to plant, if you can find plugs, they're definitely, it'll be a quicker establishment. If you're trying to germinate a larger area, then seed is certainly more economical. I think what we found, and this is another kind of one of those flip it on the head, it's actually better to be planting these ecotypic plugs in the fall. So all of those plant sales that we were having in the spring, we're now switching it to the fall, because for those plants, it's actually a much easier time for them to acclimate and get their root system going. So I think really it depends. If you can find seed, it's certainly a lot cheaper to do it from seed. But I would say that's just depending on the scale that you're trying to go for. Planting 100 plugs in a small area versus trying to turn an acre into a meadow would be two very different, use cases.
So the second part of the question is, if somebody was interested in finding ecotypic seed to our region 59, where do you go to find that? Are there certain, again, I don't want to plug certain seed companies, but are there ways of doing that? If the Ecotype Project is not yet generated enough seed to have large sales of it, where do you go to get it?
That is exactly what we're trying to address, because Heather McCargo up in Maine has a few species that she sells. The Native Plant Trust has some plant sales a couple times during the year, but truly they're within all of our, and I would be the first one to tell you exactly where to go. I would love to be able to direct you a place. Really, right now, there are not any public facing ecoregion ecotypic seed companies. And so what we're working to do is start Eco 59 as a seed collective to basically get all of those different farms that we work with, founder plots, to come together as a collective so that we can then share that seed with you all. And then a portion of each of those seed sale packets goes back to the farmers that grew it, and a portion goes to help supporting proliferate this continuing project. If there's certain species that you want, for right now, what we've been doing is, if it's a small enough request, we've been giving out some seed and asking for a donation to CT NOFA, just because we can't, until we have an official seed company, be able to officially get money to sell it. So really, you know, there's, from a scientific perspective, the Greenbelt Native Plant Center in Staten Island, they have ecotypic seed for Ecoregion 84, which is the New York City boroughs. Ed Toth, his Mid-Atlantic Regional Seed Bank, is what safeguards all the ecotypic seed for New York City. I don't even know if it's on the home scale, if they would send out accessions, but yeah, I mean, that's really why the Ecotype Project exists, is to help support and make this a more available, more available.
Okay. Here's another question.
I'm sorry,
is it,
I don't have a better answer for that.
That's okay. Is it bad? I don't know if you know the answer to this or not. Is it bad to harvest seeds from milkweed that has been aphid infested, or coneflower that has had black mold? Does that impact the seed quality?
I think it depends. We're actually testing that out right now, because some of our milkweeds had such unbelievable aphid infestations. What we've done with our milkweed founder plots is let all of the wild grasses and other plants intergrow with those species. Like for the other ones, we're kind of heavily weeding them. But like for the mints, they kind of need all those other plants in there for support. And for the milkweeds we've had, when we have more of that diversity, like how you would find them in the natural setting, that helps to deter those aphids a little bit. But certainly the head farmer spent much of the season like pulling off those aphids. And some of those seed pods were extremely damaged. And we're actually, you know, we've been trial germinating them. I don't think it's going to be your best bet. But you know, try it out. Milkweed is kind of inherently a hard one that we found to germinate just anyway. So see how it looks. You can kind of tell by what a seed looks like, is if it's gotten to full maturity. You know, it kind of has that outer dry husk and then that inner vibrant life part of it. So look at the seeds and see if it looks like they reached full maturity, and then just try it out. But I can't speak to the coneflower.
Okay, here's one other question. What should we do with existing wild weeds? Should we cut them down to bare dirt, or should we just add native seeds to existing wild garden areas? I guess just a balance of how do you balance your weeds, whatever you define your weeds to be, that and yet you want to plant with seed for your native plants.
Right. I think it all depends on what weeds you're talking about. A strategy that I've heard of is you're kind of spot planting plugs. You're like opening up soil just in specific areas and spot planting those native seeds. And then throughout that first year of establishment, at a certain, raising your mower to a certain height, so it's not cutting those plug starts, but a couple times throughout that season, going and cutting down the weeds that you don't want, to make sure that you never let their seed heads form. Because if you can start to do that, then you're inhibiting their next generation, but you're also allowing the plugs that you put in to be able to grow up. And that's the best method that I've heard for that. When it gets into invasives like mugwort and all those types of things, it gets a bit more complicated. But just a note on that too, when it comes to poison ivy, just remember that is a native plant, and it is important food for some birds as well. So if there's some wild areas on your property that you can leave, that, you know, that's a good one.
Okay. I think that's all the questions we've gotten in the chat. So maybe a good time to end tonight's presentation. But Sefra, this was just fabulous. I tell you, I can understand why people get so excited about your project just listening to you. How can people who are interested in this area support your project? Well,
I think I just sent that to private message. I was just going to put my email in the chat. So sefra@ctnofa.org. And if you go to ctnofa.org, .org/ I can't type this and talk, sorry, Ecotype Project, then you can follow along. I think supporting this project, we're doing this next botanical expedition as a fundraiser. So certainly giving to that initiative will just help be able to get more species in the pipeline and to hopefully get more seed more readily available. So finally on one of these webinars, I can say, here's where you go for seed. And I think that will be a delightful joy. So yeah, so check out the website and come paddle. And yes, shoot me an email if you have other ideas. But such a pleasure to be here. And I'm so happy you all are involved with the pollinator pathways. And Chet, thank you so much.
Sefra, thank you very much. And thank everybody else for coming tonight. Thanks again. It was wonderful. Thanks, Sefra.
All right.
Good night, everybody.
Good night.